identified as victims by court and by police. For example, transgender victims of sex trafficking are more likely to be arrested and charged by law enforcement than offered intervention or victim services. Here's a few statistics, and these can be found on nsvrc.org. 15% of transgender individuals report being assaulted while in police custody or jail. 32% of African American transgender people report being assaulted while in police or custody. 5 to 9% of transgender survivors were assaulted by police officers. 10% of transgender survivors were assaulted by healthcare professionals. Empowered by larger trends of transphobia in society, such as anti-trans legislation, public harassment against transgender people is so commonplace we barely notice it. These harassments against transgender people is commonplace, as well as harassment in gendered spaces like bathrooms and changing rooms. According to the NCAVP, acts of hate violence such as harassment, stalking, vandalism, physical and sexual assault are supported by more socially sanctioned expressions of transphobia, biphobia, and homophobia, and are intended to send a message of terror to the LGBTQ+ communities. Many queer people also face substantial bias because they belong to other traditionally marginalized groups, along with axes of identity such as race, class, incarceration history, immigration status, or ability. Membership in more than one traditionally marginalized community can increase targeting for severe violence. How is transphobia institutionalized? Transphobia has been institutionalized by the patriarchy. Systems based on binary gender, a strict divide based on limited categories of male or female, are the core of the patriarchy, a social system and ideology which places men and men's desires at the central source of authority. Patriarchy has been designed to appear as naturally occurring social fact so that people will be less likely to question it. However, expectations of gender are constructed. Stepping outside strict confines of patriarchy, we see fluid understandings of gender and sexual identity spectrum, which encompasses more realistic understanding of people. When you have stereotypes of male or female, these expectations create a real harm by dictating how people should or will be based on their imposed role to keep up the continuation of the patriarchal system. Systems that have been put in place to legitimize transphobia, such as limited or rigid categories of gender on official documents, forms, or legalities, which do not match an individual's true identity, the refusal to respect pronouns in the legal and incarceration system, the erasure of transgender affirming medical care, especially for trans youth, the refusal to address the murder of transgender people as a national crisis and hate crime, or the public outcry in speaking about the existence of fluid gender categories to children. For example, many people in the U.S. were reported to inaccurately believe that being transgender was a new concept. This, however, only further documents the erasure of transgender people throughout history and showcase how institutionalized transphobia has been so deeply rooted in our society, we think it's the natural, godly way of life. What is the connection between transphobia and health inequality? Discrimination, mistreatment, violence that trans people face in healthcare settings further exacerbate their lack of access to competent, transforming, and affordable healthcare. This includes refusing to provide medical care using the person's name or pronouns intentionally and unwanted physical contact that happens to 1 out of 10 survivors. Between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 trans people report avoiding or postponing seeking care and preventative screenings out of concern for how they will be treated by medical personnel. Even when trans people seek out screenings, insurance policies, and legislation, there can be barriers. This contributes to wide disparity in health and life expectancy for trans people in numbers of areas, from depression, suicide, and anxiety to asthma and heart disease. For example, among the general U.S. population, 0.3% live with HIV as compared to the 1.4%, nearly 5 times more, of trans people. 6.7% are Black trans people, and a staggering 19% of Black trans people live with HIV. What is the connection between transphobia and housing inequality? Housing discrimination is not an uncommon experience for trans people, with nearly a quarter reporting being evicted from their homes, being denied a home, and other form of housing discrimination. This is an obvious contributor to low levels of home ownership, 16% compared to 63%, and high rates of homelessness, with nearly a third of trans people having been homeless at some point in their lives. With discrimination and mistreatment in shelters being a reality, more than a quarter of trans people experience homelessness, avoid accessing any shelters due to fear of mistreatment. Mistreatment in shelters affect 70% of trans people. This includes harassment, physical or sexual violence, expulsion. 63% of trans people who are homeless compared to 49% of cisgendered people are unsheltered. This significantly elevates vulnerability to chronic and mental health issues, drug and alcohol use, self-harm, and avoiding medical treatment. Due to homophobia, trans communities face a multitude of structurally, institutionally, and socially imposed challenges that lead to higher rates of unemployment and underemployment, housing and food insecurities, poverty, departures from educational institutions, and health disparities. Each of these are magnified for trans people of color, and specifically trans women and femmes of color, who also contend with the colliding forces of racism, anti-Blackness, xenophobia, and misogyny. All of this further trans people's exposure to experience varying forms of violence, harassment, and displacement. Therefore, ending sexual violence against these people by transphobic people, by entering trans people in preventative and responsive efforts. This also includes medical assistance. So why do churches erase and support groups that pass hate laws, legislation that restricts or completely changes the way trans people are treated in this country? Because the church has been built on the patriarchy. And when you're used to white privilege, equality feels like oppression. Why is it when you see pictures of people at church, 8 out of 10 of those pictures will be of white people? Because religion has always given privilege to the apex of social people. If you are at the highest race